I'm Marcy Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. A work release program in Slidell has been under federal scrutiny, and according to a bill of information, former officials of the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office are objects of the scrutiny. We'll be looking at the latest in what has been an ongoing investigation. We'll also probe into the political ambitions of Senator John Kennedy and former Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and at some political careers that may be decided on the December 8th runoff ballot, as well as a new poll that measures the popularity of Leon Cannizzaro and Mike Yenny. Our Future Watch segment examines the civic side of holiday lighting, and we'll look at a peaceful coming together on the city's budget. Lighting the way for us on tonight's Informed Sources are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Stephanie Grace, columnist, The New Orleans Advocate, Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter, and Katie Moore, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. And we're going to go first over to Stephanie, and a poll that came out by UNO Survey Research Center. It was a quality of life poll, but in that came out some numbers also on local elected officials. Cannizzaro and Yenny, let's talk about them.
Yes, let's do that. UNO polls voters in Jefferson Parish and Orleans Parish every couple of years. And like you said, it's about quality of life. It's not a political poll, but they do ask approval rating of a number of people. And there were two numbers that really kind of jumped out at me on that, you know, when you look at who's up and who's down. I want to start with up. Mike Yenny, unexpectedly, I think. Pollster Ed Chervenak said unexpectedly, and I think most people agree with that. This is the first time UNO has polled on his approval ratings since his sexting scandal. You remember, that goes back a couple of years. There was a failed recall attempt because the bar to recall somebody is very high. It's hard to do. So he's been in office. He's been, you know, going to work and running the parish, and still not allowed on school board property. But he has not said whether he plans to run for re-election next year. Meanwhile, a couple of other big names are looking at running, whether he does or not. Cynthia Lee Shang, the councilwoman, and John Young, the former parish president, being the main two. And Mike Yenny has really kind of tried to power through this scandal, and this, I think, is maybe the first sign that it is maybe a possibility. I think it's important to note that this is not, should he be reelected, this is how's he doing on the job. So those are two different questions. But how's he doing on the job? 60% said he's doing a good job.
And there's pretty high level of satisfaction, according to that poll in Jefferson Parish among residents there, about the way the parish is moving along.
Sure, and again, this does not necessarily mean they want him to be the parish president. It means that they think the administration is doing a good job. And again, there's a lot of indication that people are happy with.
But on the other hand,
we
saw what happened in the sheriff's race with John Fortunato.
And that's kind of the counterintuitive or the counterfactual, I guess. John Fortunato, who was running for sheriff, said he would support Mike Yenny for running for re-election, and there was such blowback that he ended up taking it back. So after that, I think people really thought that this was the best measure of Yenny's standing, and now we have this, which is a little bit of a different look. And for someone like Yenny, who is probably looking for good news, here it is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. That's a pretty good number.
Yes.
It has to be pretty encouraging.
I mean, it's higher than Mayor Cantrell, who had 57%, so, you know, close, but...
How does it compare to the last time they polled?
The last time they polled, he was, I think, 70, but that was before
the
scandal.
So
he was brand new in
Jefferson Parish,
office.
I think the Yenny name still has a lot of traction. It's been around for such a long time.
And that's another kind of interesting factor, does it still, given everything that's happened, because really everybody knows about this.
Right, and people said Fortunato lost that election because of that.
That's the thing that really seemed to tilt the momentum. I should say Fortunato, the man who beat Fortunato, Joe Lopinto, had a 76% approval rating, and that follows, Newell Normand always had a very high approval rating too, so that, you know, sheriffs do well in Jefferson Parish.
Okay, over in Orleans, the present DA.
The present DA, different story, Leon Cannizzaro. He also has said we don't know whether he's running again in 2 years. His election is in 2020. He has an opponent, an announced opponent, Jason Williams, the councilman who is a defense lawyer, B, head of the Criminal Justice Committee on the City Council, and C, a longtime critic of Cannizzaro. And Cannizzaro, he's at 42%, which is down 13% from the previous poll. He's way down among white voters. That's a number that a lot of people are looking at because his base is really white voters. He's done well in the past with white and black voters, but he dropped from 60% to 38% approval, 22% drop, 7% drop among black voters. And when you look at what's been happening in the DA's office, of course, there was the fake subpoena scandal, which got him just horrible publicity. This is when his office was basically subpoenaing witnesses, reluctant witnesses, and saying that they could go to prison or if they didn't show up, and he didn't have a judge's order to do that.
Other DAs had done that too. He wasn't the only one.
But the language in his was more threatening. It was a little different, and he's now stopped doing that. There were stories of him locking up witnesses, victims of domestic violence who were afraid to testify. He got involved in the Cantrell Charbonnet race. And he's really, the kind of bigger picture, I think, is that he is someone who is not really in line with the criminal justice sentencing reform movement broadly, all kinds of issues, cash bail, juvenile justice, whether juveniles should be treated as adults. There's kind of a series of issues where there's kind of a consensus in a lot of places on rethinking mass incarceration, and he really isn't in that camp. Jason Williams is in that camp. So if there is a race between the two of them, I think that's going to be an interesting thread to it. And if you look around the country, there have been a number of chief prosecutors, DAs in big cities, Philadelphia, Boston, St. Louis, where these progressive kind of criminal justice reform prosecutors have been elected. That's another reason I would be a little worried if I were Leon
But
Canizero.
also, Canizero is a former judge
Yes.
who had a fairly good reputation as a judge, and so he probably has a whole different perspective on the whole criminal justice system than a lot of activists would have. So,
All right, so interesting poll numbers.
Very.
We'll be taking a look at more in the future, I'm sure. Katie, over to you. You've been doing investigation for a while now into a work release program in St. Tammany Parish, and there was charges filed against two former St. Tammany Parish deputies involved with this program.
Absolutely. That happened on Wednesday of this week, and it was pretty shocking news. We've been covering this for about 5 years. Myself and our partners over at The Advocate, Sarah Pagonis and Gordon Russell, actually started out covering this series of stories with me on the work release programs over there. And, you know, we started out by documenting deaths at the facilities, people who were escaping at the facilities, unsafe conditions, a lack of supervision, and raised the questions about whether or not Strain had given these programs to his buddies to run.
Former sheriff.
Right.
Yeah, of
The
St. Tammany
former
Parish.
St. Tammany Parish sheriff had given them to his buddies to run. And, you know, I think these this bill of information, I should say, that came out earlier this week against two of those top deputies is an indication that that was the case.
So there were two centers, one in Covington and one in Slidell. Ultimately, the one in Covington was closed, right?
The one
so
in-
the one
yeah.
in Slidell, tell us how that was worked out to be a private enterprise.
So both of them were private, but the one in Slidell in particular, this bill of information indicates that Strain may have worked with the two deputies who were charged this week to set up a private company in order to profit off of this work release program. And what that is it's a program where prisoners who are at the end of their sentences get to stay at like a prison-like barracks during the night, and then during the day they would go out and work jobs in the community. And then the private company would take 70% almost of their pay. And so it's a high dollar enterprise if you can get it. And the way they got it, allegedly, was through Jack Strain.
And also, these two deputies, they remained on the force with the sheriff's office, but they were owners of this, but they couldn't really be, so they turned it
Right.
over to their children.
Yes, their two children were 45% each owners of this enterprise. And so the money basically would come into the children. Children would funnel it to these two top deputies, David Hansen Sr. and Skip Clifford Keene. And then they would funnel it, allegedly, back to the St. Tammany sheriff.
So what kind of money are we talking about? That,
Over $1 million.
transpired here?
Over $1 million these two ended up bringing in just in about 3 years that they were running this program. So it's a significant chunk of change.
And this is from the salaries of the inmates who were out there working, but also there was a per diem paid by the state as well. So there were
Exactly.
state monies that were.
Exactly.
So what were the charges now filed?
The charges
against
that
the
were filed
deputies?
against them were soliciting bribes and then wire fraud. So soliciting bribes, obviously, allegedly, to send the money back to Jack Strain. That's
Okay.
the allegation.
And the allegation is, and Jack Strain is not named in this bill of information, right?
He is not. He's named as Public Official 1, but then the Bill of Information goes on to say that Public Official 1 is the former St. Tammany sheriff. So it's pretty clear it's Jack Strain.
So what are the feds saying? How did Jack Strain allegedly benefit from this?
He got cash payments, they say, from both Skip Keen and from Hansen, $1,000 plus. A lot of the times that he was getting them, they were regular payments. They had one of his relatives was getting like a $30,000 salary for doing nothing. His son received a $4,000 payment from this program, all under the guise that you allowed them to have this program, so you need to pay him.
So the federal government is making these charges on the bill of information. What does that generally indicate?
Indicates that they are likely to plead guilty. So these two are two people who are not only top deputies under Strain, but sources tell us these are two of his best friends who are now, all indications are, cooperating with federal investigators.
What has Jack Strain said about the investigation as it's gone on? And all of your reporting, you've talked to him in the past about this.
We've gotten him on the phone. Whenever these stories first started breaking back in 2013, that's how long we've been investigating this, but back when those started breaking, we interviewed him a couple of times, vehemently denied that he had any family or personal interest in the companies, even though these were issued in no-bid contracts. And again, they're the children of two of his top deputies and two of his closest friends.
Any comment from him since this has occurred this week?
No, we've not gotten a comment from him or from the lawyers of the two people who've been charged.
So
Okay,
what's
let me ask
anticipated?
you-
What's next for Jack Strain? Do we know?
We don't know, but all indications are from every expert that I've talked to, including the current sheriff, that Jack Strain is the target of this federal investigation, and one would reason that at some point he may be, charged as well.
And we've seen a real trend here in St. Tammany Parish of parish-wide
Yeah.
officials, haven't we?
Unfortunately,
in
it's
past years.
Raphael Goyeneche with the Metro Crime Commission said it's the trifecta and gives new meaning to criminal justice in St. Tammany with the coroner, the sheriff, and the DA, Walter Reed.
Very disappointing.
Yeah.
All righty, thanks a lot, Katie. Errol, over to you. We are facing runoff election December 8th.
On December 8th, I predict the loneliest people in Louisiana will be the poll workers. It's going to be a long day from 7 in the morning to 8 p.m. in the afternoon, and especially the Secretary of State's office did a breakdown. Okay, every place is going to have the one common denominator is the Secretary of State runoff. That'll be every place in the state. But 8 parishes, that's the only thing that's on the ballot, and it's not really that much of a runoff. I think it's a fairly one-sided in terms of the way that the votes came out. So imagine, like, if you're a poll commissioner in Cameron Parish or St. Helena Parish, bring a big stack of magazines that day because you're not going to see many other people. 9 parishes have the Secretary of State race, plus miscellaneous referendum elections. Not the kind with candidates, but referendums, like approving a tax or something. And then the remaining 47 have miscellaneous municipal elections, like a judgeship runoff, nothing really major. And so it's Secretary of State and a lot of small elections that day. And so, yes, it's going to be a fairly quiet day. We just picked a few elections just out of random in the area. Of course, the Secretary of State race will be the most important. And in terms of statewide impacts, Kyle Ardoin, who's the interim incumbent, really came close to winning last time. And with a surprise candidate with Gwen Collins Green up. But this is going to break down into Republican Democrat. There's no ideological split. There's no major issue in this campaign. In some of the other races, just in the area here, in Jefferson Parish, there's actually, this is interesting, there's actually 3 school board seats that are up that are in a runoff. And that can say, that kind of shows some kind of potential division. In the past, there's always been a factionalism between business and the labor unions. A couple of these people actually have support of both sides, but there could just be a big shift in the Jefferson Parish
So
Council.
let's just quickly run through those. We see those 2.
Okay, and then let's see what else we have. And then let's move on to Orleans
one.
Parish. We have.
This is all Jefferson Parish, and
yeah, these
then
would be
move on to Orleans now.
Yeah, these would be the other 2 Jefferson Parish runoffs. In Orleans Parish, we have a judgeship runoff, Omar Mason, who ran, almost won it in the primary against Marie Williams. And then there's one home rule charter amendment. This has to do with professional service contracts, and it just puts tougher language in the law in terms of who gets professional service contracts. It goes back to Mitch Landrieu, who was trying to implement some things to clean up some of the stuff from the Ray Nagin days. And then in Plaquemines Parish, there's a runoff. Amos Cormier is the interim. He took his dad's seat. His dad died a couple of years ago and was elected to fill that vacancy. But Kirk LaPinto, Lapine, had a pretty big lead in the runoff, and so it'll be between the two of them.
All righty. Well, we'll see what happens on December 8th. Thanks a lot, E. Moving on over to Stephanie again, and still, future elections that we're going to talk about, which maybe they will, maybe they won't.
Exactly.
And that's Senator Kennedy and Mitch Landrieu.
Mitch Landrieu. So we will know the answer to one of those questions soon, and that's John Kennedy. Mitch Landrieu, we don't know. John Kennedy actually had set himself a deadline to announce whether he's running against John Bel Edwards. It was December 1st. It's now December 3rd. He's pushed it back to Monday. So Monday we should know.
What's he waiting for?
Well, that's the question. He says he hasn't decided, and he's really been acting very much like a candidate. He's been sitting up in Washington criticizing the governor every opportunity, really picking on things that would be his issues, Medicaid, criminal justice. He says he hasn't decided. There are people around him who think maybe he hasn't. Even though the Republicans have somewhat cleared the field, people like Jeff Landry have said they're not running. Steve Scalise, of course, isn't running.
In a news cycle, though, wouldn't Monday be better than Saturday anyway?
I think so. And the thinking was he would do it this week. But one possible explanation, which is not necessarily suspicious, is that the Senate's very busy this week. And one of the things he's involved in is they just got a short-term extension of flood insurance. So Monday might be better.
Our friend Jeremy Alford with Louisiana Politics says, not that he's cynical or anything, but saying doing it this way, he actually controlled two news cycles.
He does.
One cycle I'm going to do it Saturday, and another cycle saying I'm going to do it Monday.
We all thought the big story this week was going to be John Kennedy, so we've been preparing for it. So yes, it's interesting. The John Bel Edwards is not waiting. There are people, the outside political groups, the PACs, not necessarily connected to him, but supporting him, are already running internet ads attacking John Kennedy. So the campaign has started. It's just, this will make it official whether he really has a very high-profile opponent or it's going to be maybe a mishmash of lesser-known Republicans.
Mitch Landrieu.
Mitch Landrieu. I would say the 2020 presidential election has started on the Democratic side. There are Democrats who are openly admitting that they're considering running, people like Cory Booker from New Jersey and Sherrod Brown from Ohio. Mitch Landrieu is not. However, he's still out there talking. He gave a very interesting interview to the New York Times last week. He says he's not a candidate. He said, I'm not doing the things people who are running do, which isn't really true. He wrote a book and he's giving interviews to the New York Times. And he has shown, in this interview, he really showed that he's given it a lot of thought. And he had some interesting comments about what his challenges would be if he did run. One is that he's someone who's really talking about race and racial reconciliation. And he's a white man from the South. And some of the other candidates, including Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, are African American. And he, is kind of looking ahead and imagining what that would look like and how that would play with voters. And another is that there definitely is this strain on the Democratic side that there are some people who want someone more confrontational, maybe more ideologically to the left, more, $15 minimum wage, Medicaid for all. He's more of a centrist, he considers himself. And I think...
But he could be confrontational,
He can
too.
be
He can be confrontational,
Yeah.
but more ideologically confrontational than he is. That's really what he meant. So, and that's going to be one of the big debates in the party, whether it's going to be someone who maybe is more of a traditional Democrat like Mitch Landrieu, or maybe someone who is more, if not Bernie Sanders, but those politics.
Also, he supports Joe Biden, too. I mean, he
And
said that
that's
he
the-
would
and
if Joe
that's the
Biden
third
would jump
thing.
into the race.
He did. He has said he's waiting to see what Joe Biden would do. He didn't rule it out. He said, I'm not a candidate as of now. That's what people say. One thing to read out of this is he is watching it very, very closely, and he is envisioning how he could fit into
But
it.
remember when he was lieutenant governor and he denied that he was going to run for mayor?
Yeah.
And then he ran for mayor.
Right.
And by denying, you kind of take the target off your back a little bit, too. And so that helps.
Well, he definitely went around the country, too, introducing himself to
And-
segments of the country and promoting
And he's
his book.
still doing it because he's out of office. That's what he's doing, and he's a very popular speaker out there on the circuit. I mean,
And
he
he's
can
a-
do that for another 2 years.
He's a dynamic speaker, too.
Yes.
So, all righty. Thanks a lot,
Okay.
Steph. Dawn, over to you. We're lighting up the city.
much less weighty issues here. Lighting up the city, actually, Errol and I were talking about whether or not Christmas lights and displays or holiday lights and displays have really become more of a business. And if you look just at the numbers, yes, they have. Celebration in the Oaks is probably the best known light display in the metro area. It's in its 32nd year. It draws visitors from all 50 states and several foreign countries as far away as Australia. It is the City Park, which is self-funded mostly, largest fundraiser every year. It brings in about 15% of the park's annual budget, collecting $10 per person at the gate for admission to that event. And it opened for a little while over the Thanksgiving holiday. It opens officially again tonight through January 1st, with the exclusions of Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve. Then on the new front, there are the zoo lights in Audubon Park, which is a completely new light display that Audubon Zoo, that Audubon Zoo is doing in conjunction with Children's Hospital. It's lit up large silk lanterns that were actually manufactured in China, larger than life animals. It's $10 a night for zoo members and $15 for non-members. I've heard that they are trying to attract about 2,000 people a night, and it's looking like it may be even more than that. They're in a 4-year contract with a local company to put that on. Then there are things like LunaFet in Lafayette Square that is free to go to. It's Arts Council of New Orleans puts it on. It's in its 5th year. NOLA Christmas Fest is in its 6th year at the convention center. That's ice skating and ice slides and rides and lights and all sorts of things. That's $20 a person and fills up every single day. And you have the free ones. You've got Canal Street Lights and the Roosevelt Hotel and Miracle on Fulton Street. And then things like Christmas in the Park, which is Lafreniere Park. It is in its 10th year of charging for the event, but it's had lights in the park since 1990. They grew and were able to expand after the death of Al Copeland. They got all the lights from Al Copeland's formerly free neighborhood Christmas light display.
The neighbors are probably happy about
And they have grown so much over the time since that donation that the Copeland donation now only accounts for 8% of their lights. They draw in, they charge per car. They don't count heads. They said, you can drive a bus in, you can drive a VW Bug in. Each vehicle that comes into the park is $5, and last year they saw roughly 20,000 vehicles. Their revenue all goes back into next year's light display, making it bigger and better every year. They're all LED lights, and they have more than 10 million lights in their display, including a big giant sea creature in the lagoon. So it really is, the answer to your question, Errol, is yes, it is a business. Surrounded by holiday themes and feel-good ideas, but there's a lot of money being made.
They can help put everybody really into the spirit, too.
Yes, it's
Well,
great.
the Christmas season is a downtime for tourism, at least the convention side of tourism. You don't have many conventions, and so for the same reason that bowl games are so attractive to communities, it gives a little impetus to bring people into your community at a time when there's one strain of business that you lose, and
a lot of it is regional tourism. It's not, while people are going to Celebration in the Oaks from far and wide, it's likely people who are in town for some other purpose who decide to take that on. Christmas in the Park at Lafreniere Park, they draw from St. Tammany Parish and Lafourche and Terrebonne, but probably, they said about 90% of their cars are Louisiana license plates.
it used to be the big thing in Louisiana was in Natchitoches, the Christmas on the bayou, but now there's so much competition
And the
for that.
bonfires on the levee,
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
That's right. That's right. Well, fun thing for families to do.
Yes,
Okay,
there's no shortage of any of it.
Thanks a lot, Dawn. Okay, Stephanie, rounding out with you. And the city budget, some describe it
Yes.
as a kumbaya moment over there between the administration and city council.
I think I said that.
I saw that in the headline.
Yes, and it's interesting because that hasn't always been the way it's been so far with this mayor and this council. Everybody's still pretty new. And it's a very assertive council. We've seen that on a number of fronts with deciding they want to do their own millage separate from the mayor, with overseeing the sewage and water board. It really looked like they were possibly going to have a contentious budget process. Budgeting is one of the main areas of responsibility of the council, that the mayor submits a budget, the council then gets to do whatever it wants. There was some tension early on because the council really wanted to get the budget, the mayor's proposed budget, earlier than it did. Mitch Landrieu kind of broke with previous precedent and delivered it before November 1st, which is when the mayor's required to. It has to be passed by December 1st, so then you run into Thanksgiving, and if you're going to make a lot of changes, have a lot of hearings, that's not a lot of time. LaToya Cantrell delivered it by November 1st, not early. But from there, things went pretty smoothly, I have to say. There were some changes, some small changes. They added about $3 million. It's a $702 million budget. And they agreed on a lot of things and a lot of big priorities. One of them is pay raises for city employees. Most city employees, not police and fire, who've gotten raises recently, and not the lowest paid employees who had gotten raises, but a 10% raise for the first time in many years. So that's going to help a lot of people.
Sure will.
Campaign promise, of course. Early childhood education, at the council's request, they doubled the allotment to 1.5 million, which will serve another 100 kids or so. It's still far short of what the cities need. Everybody acknowledges that, but it's
a good start.
It's moving in the right direction. It shows their priority. Sobering Center, more money for catch basin cleaning. Everybody wants that. Woohoo. Woohoo. Some money for public defenders to replace money that will be lost when the administration scales back traffic cameras. That was a big issue. And what she ran on this as an issue. Her position shifted a little over time. What the administration came up with was keeping them in school zones and keeping a few of the ones that are most lucrative. They had proposed upping traffic enforcement maybe to make up some of that revenue. The council pushed back and they decided not to do that. They had a press conference. They got it done a couple days early as they planned, and everyone is holding hands for now.
So the city has a budget, and there is a little bit more money for early childhood ed, which
Yes.
there's a real big focus on
Absolutely.
right now. All right, thanks a lot, Steph. Time to look ahead.
A website called Home to Go has ranked what it says as the top 50 travel destinations for millennials. And among many criteria they use is affordability. Also, how good of a place it is for Instagram if you want to take a lot of pictures, because millennials like to take pictures. Miami ranked number 1. New Orleans ranked number 7, ahead of Jacksonville and right behind Tampa, I believe. But we're up there.
Good. Steph?
I mentioned the Senate working on flood insurance. They've agreed, it's supposed to expire today. They've agreed to extend it a week. Hopefully they'll get a 6-month extension. In the next Congress, things are looking better for a longer-term revision based on Democrats taking over and who's the change in chairmanship. So I think we'll do okay in the long run.
We certainly need it here. Dawn?
I mentioned all of these displays, but Luna Fête is the shortest lived one, and that is in Lafayette Square next week, December 6th through 9th, every night.
Okay, just a few nights then.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
I am looking ahead to domestic violence. I just recently did a series on it, and it was incredible. It was about women who are serving life sentences for killing their domestic partners. And so I can say that I'm working on some more follow-ups to that, because I think it's a significant issue here, and I think it's one that needs to be addressed. So
When will we start seeing
coming.
that?
I
you
don't
think?
know yet.
Okay.
It's a work in progress.
All right, we'll look for it. Thanks a lot, you guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.